the silver spoon, and the silent war. I used to believe that love could fix anything. I thought that if you gave someone your entire heart, stood by them through their worst moments, and built a life together from the ground up, they would value you forever. But sitting in front of my vanity mirror on a freezing Thursday evening, putting on a pair of diamond earrings that felt heavier than lead, I realized how wrong I had been. My name is Maya, and to the outside world, I had the perfect life. I was married to Julian Vance, a self-made tech mogul whose company was valued at over $200 million. We lived in a sprawling estate in the suburbs of Chicago, drove luxury cars, and attended high society galas every weekend. On paper, we were the ultimate power couple, but behind the closed doors of our fortress, my life was a quiet, suffocating nightmare. Julian hadn't always been cold. When we met in college, he was a struggling student with big dreams and empty pockets. I was an art history major who saw something brilliant in him. I worked 2 jobs to pay our rent while he built his first software prototype in our tiny, drafty apartment. I believed in him when nobody else did. When his first major investor pulled out, leaving us with maxed-out credit cards, I gave him my late grandmother's inheritance, the only money I had in the world to keep his dream alive. And it worked. Julian's startup exploded. Within 5 years, he went from eating instant noodles to shaking hands with senators. But as his bank account grew, his heart shrank. The humble, grateful man I married slowly vanished, replaced by an arrogant, status-obsessed corporate elite who viewed everything and everyone as an asset or a liability. The real test of our marriage came 4 years ago, when I gave birth to our twin boys, Leo and Noah. They were born 3 months premature. It was a terrifying night. I spent weeks in the neonatal intensive care unit, holding their tiny, fragile hands through the glass of the incubators, praying for them to breathe, to fight, to survive. They did survive, but the lack of oxygen during their birth left them both with severe cerebral palsy and developmental delays. They are nonverbal, they use wheelchairs, and they require round-the-clock care and physical therapy. To me, Leo and Noah are my absolute world. Their bright, innocent eyes, their quiet giggles when I read them their favorite books, and the way their faces light up when I walk into the room, they are the greatest blessings of my life. To Julian, however, they were an embarrassment. He never said it out loud at first, but I saw it in his eyes. He stopped coming with us to their therapy sessions. He stopped inviting his high-profile colleagues over to our house. Whenever he had guests, he would subtly ask the nanny to keep the boys upstairs in their rooms, out of sight. He hated the sensory equipment, the wheelchair ramps we had to install, and the noisy medical gear. He felt that having disabled children tarnished his image of a perfect, genetically superior, successful man. On the night of the annual Vance Foundation charity gala, the biggest night of Julian's year, I was adjusting my dress in the mirror when Julian walked into our master bedroom. He looked sharp in his tailored tuxedo, but his face was set in a tight, impatient scowl. "Are you almost ready, Maya?" he asked, checking his gold Rolex without looking at me. "The town car is waiting downstairs, and the board members are already arriving at the venue." "I'm just finishing my makeup, Julian," I said, keeping my voice gentle. "I was just downstairs checking on the boys. Leo had a slight fever earlier, so I wanted to make sure his night nurse had everything she needed." Julian let out a sharp, irritated sigh and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Maya, we've talked about this. You have a team of 3 private nurses. You don't need to hover over them every single second. Tonight is about my career. The governor is going to be there. The CEO of Apex Global is flying in from New York. I need you focused, present, and charming. I don't need you smelling like baby formula and disinfectant." I turned around, staring at my husband of 7 years. The coldness in his tone cut right through me, but I had learned to swallow my pain for the sake of peace. "They are 4 years old, Julian. They are your sons. Leo was running a fever, and I'm their mother." "They are fine," he snapped, walking over to the bar in the corner of our room and pouring himself 2 fingers of scotch. "They have doctors, nurses, and everything money can buy. Stop playing the martyr. Just put on your shoes, put a smile on your face, and let's go. I cannot afford any distractions tonight." I took a deep breath, smoothing down my dark blue velvet dress. I looked at the photograph of Leo and Noah sitting on my nightstand. Their wide, bright smiles gave me strength. I told myself that Julian was just stressed about the gala. I told myself that underneath all his corporate coldness, he still cared. I was wrong. That night, the thin veil of respect Julian pretended to hold for our family was about to be torn down forever. The whispers of high society. The grand ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton was blindingly extravagant. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceilings, casting a warm, golden light over hundreds of women in designer gowns and men in crisp tuxedos. Orchestral music played softly in the background, while waiters in white gloves circulated with trays of expensive champagne and delicate appetizers. This was Julian's kingdom. He moved through the crowd with absolute confidence, shaking hands, exchanging loud laughs with powerful investors, and accepting praise for his recent multi-million-dollar acquisition. I walked beside him, smiling until my cheeks ached, fulfilling my duty as the supportive wife. But as I moved through the room, I couldn't escape the subtle, poisonous atmosphere of high society. People in this world were fake. They smiled to your face, but their whispers followed you like a shadow. While Julian was caught in a deep conversation with a real estate tycoon near the bar, I excused myself to get a glass of sparkling water. As I stood near a decorative floral arrangement near the balcony doors, I heard two familiar voices talking on the other side of the silk curtains. It was Victoria, the wife of Julian's chief financial officer, and Evelyn, a prominent socialite who hosted half the charity events in the city. "Have you seen Maya tonight?" Victoria whispered, her voice dripping with pseudo-pity. "She looks so tired, poor thing." "Well, can you blame her?" Evelyn replied with a light chuckle. "She spends all her time locked up in that house playing nurse. Honestly, I don't know how Julian deals with it. It's such a tragic situation." "Tragic? It's a disaster for his image," Victoria sneered softly. "Julian is trying to position his company for an IPO next year. Investors want to see strength, perfection, power. Having two severely disabled heirs hanging over his head. It's just not a good look. People are talking. They wonder why he never brings them out, why there are no family photos in his magazine profiles." "I heard a rumor," Evelyn lowered her voice even further, "that Julian is looking into long-term residential facilities out in the countryside. Private institutions where they can be cared for quietly, away from the public eye. But Maya refuses to sign the papers." My heart stopped. My throat went completely dry. The glass of water in my hand trembled so violently that a few drops spilled over the rim onto my wrist. Residential facilities, countryside institutions. Julian had never mentioned anything like that to me. The very thought of sending my innocent, tender little boys away to be raised by strangers in some cold, isolated facility made a surge of fierce, burning rage erupt in my chest. Were these just mindless high society rumors? Or was my husband secretly planning to banish our children to protect his precious corporate image? I stepped away from the curtains before they could see me, my mind racing. I needed to look at Julian. I needed to see his face, to find out if there was any truth to the terrible words I had just overheard. I walked back toward the center of the ballroom. Julian was standing in a circle with 5 of his biggest shareholders, including Richard Vance, his wealthy, ultra-conservative uncle who held a 15% stake in Julian's company, and several prominent board members. As I approached the group, I noticed that Julian had already had 3 or 4 drinks. His face was slightly flushed, his posture relaxed, and his voice was louder than usual. He was holding court, enjoying the rapt attention of the most influential people in the room. "Julian, you've really outdone yourself this year," Uncle Richard said, patting Julian on the shoulder. "The Q3 reports were phenomenal. But tell me, when are we going to see the whole family at one of these events? You've been married for 7 years now. We see Maya, but where are the boys? A growing family man inspires confidence in conservative investors." The circle went quiet for a moment. Several people looked at Julian, waiting for his response. I paused a few feet away, hidden slightly behind a tall marble pillar. My pulse was pounding in my ears. I waited for Julian to talk about our sons with pride. I waited for him to say that Leo and Noah were fighting hard every day, that they were the joy of our lives, even if they couldn't attend large, noisy parties. Instead, a bitter, annoyed smirk crossed Julian's face. He waved his hand dismissively, taking a slow sip of his scotch. "Oh, please, Richard, don't start," Julian said, his voice carrying clearly over the soft violin music. "Let's not ruin a good night with depressing talk." Uncle Richard frowned slightly. "What do you mean, depressing?" Julian scoffed, shaking his head with zero hesitation. "Look, let's be realistic for once. Having disabled kids in the house is just a total disaster. It's an embarrassment. They make our guests uncomfortable whenever anyone comes over. They drain my wife's energy completely, and frankly, they bring down the whole vibe of my household. It's a tragic situation, but I'm not going to pretend it's something to celebrate." The air left my lungs in a single, painful gasp. It was as if the entire ballroom had gone dead silent, though the music kept playing and people kept laughing in the distance. The world slowed down to an agonizing crawl. Disabled kids make guests uncomfortable. They are an embarrassment. He didn't just think it. He didn't just feel it in private. He said it out loud. In front of his colleagues, his board members, his investors, and his family. He traded the dignity of his 4-year-old disabled children for a moment of cheap, cynical bonding with wealthy men. I looked at Julian's face. There was no regret on it, no hesitation, just cold, callous arrogance. In that exact second, something inside me broke. The soft, forgiving, patient wife who had stood by him through poverty, who had excused his late nights, who had justified his growing emotional distance, that woman died right then and there. A cold, icy stillness washed over my veins. The sadness vanished, swallowed whole by a dark, unbreakable resolve. I didn't make a scene. I didn't scream, cry, or throw my glass at his face. That was what he would expect from an emotional, broken woman. He would use my tears to paint me as unstable, to justify his cruel words to the world. Instead, I slowly lifted my head, adjusted my shoulders, and took off my wedding ring. I walked out of the grand ballroom. I walked past the valet, out into the freezing winter night air, and I didn't look back once. The cold departure. When I arrived back at our estate, the house was quiet. The soft, warm nightlights were on in the hallway. I went straight upstairs to the boys' nursery. The room smelled faintly of baby lavender lotion and clean cotton. I walked over to their cribs. Leo was sleeping peacefully on his side, his thumb tucked gently into his mouth. In the adjacent crib, Noah was curled up under his favorite blue blanket, breathing softly. I sat on the rocking chair between their beds, resting my hands on my knees. Tears finally escaped my eyes, silently streaming down my face, not out of sorrow for myself, but out of a fierce, protective love for these two precious souls. They didn't choose to be born with physical challenges. They didn't choose to fight every single day just to move their small fingers or sit upright. They were pure, innocent, and completely blameless. And the man who was supposed to be their shield, their protector, had called them an embarrassment to impress a room full of strangers in expensive suits. "I am so sorry," I whispered into the quiet room, wiping a tear from my cheek. "I am so sorry I let him treat you like a secret. I promise you on my life that ends tonight." I stood up and went straight to work. I called the night nurse, quietly explained that we were leaving, and asked her to help me pack the boys' essential medical supplies, specialized feeding equipment, and clothes. While she packed the boys' room, I went to Julian's home office. For 7 years, Julian had treated me like a traditional, quiet housewife who stayed in her lane. He thought I was just an art major who knew nothing about business, finance, or corporate law. What he had forgotten or perhaps chosen to ignore was that during the early years of his company, I was the one who managed his initial books. I was the one who drafted his first contracts. I knew every password, every safe combination, and every financial secret he had built his empire on. I walked over to the built-in mahogany bookshelf, moved a decorative brass vase, and exposed the digital wall safe. I entered the 8-digit coded date Julian thought was clever, but was actually the day his first major patent was filed. Click. The heavy metal door swung open. Inside were stacks of backup hard drives, personal ledgers, property deeds, and confidential tax documents. I wasn't looking to steal his money out of greed. I wanted justice. As I flipped through the dark blue folder marked personal assets and offshore accounts, my eyes caught a series of recent bank transfers. Julian had been moving massive sums of money, millions of dollars, out of our joint marital estate and into shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands over the last 18 months. He wasn't just planning to emotionally distance himself from us. He was preparing for a divorce. He was actively hiding assets so that if we ever split, he could leave me and our special needs twins with absolute pennies, forcing me into a position where I wouldn't be able to afford their expensive lifelong care. He had planned this meticulously. He was starving us out before the battle had even begun. A chill ran down my spine, but it was immediately replaced by a surge of adrenaline. He thought he was playing chess with a novice. He had no idea that I was about to overturn the entire board. I took out my encrypted high-speed flash drive and downloaded every single document, every tax evasion paper, every illegal offshore ledger, and every private communication file stored on those drives. I photographed every physical document with my phone. Then, I carefully locked the safe, put the vase back in its exact position, and walked out. By 2:30 a.m., the boys were securely buckled into their specialized safety seats in the back of my SUV. Their bags, medical gear, and my essentials were packed in the trunk. As I sat in the driver's seat, key in the ignition, I looked back at the massive, cold mansion towering in the darkness. It was a golden cage built on lies, arrogance, and hidden cruelty. I started the engine, hit the remote for the iron security gates, and drove away into the night. About 20 minutes later, my phone began to buzz on the dashboard. It was Julian. He was likely just getting home from the gala, drunk and confused as to why the house was empty and my clothes were gone. I declined the call. A second later, a text message popped up. "Where the hell are you, Maya? Why aren't the boys in their rooms? What kind of stunt are you playing? Come back right now." I pulled over to the side of the quiet highway, looked at the message, and typed back a single, cold response. "You said disabled kids make your guests uncomfortable. You don't have to worry about being uncomfortable ever again. My lawyer will be in touch in the morning." I blocked his number, turned off my GPS tracking, and drove straight to a private house in the countryside that I had rented using my own separate, untouched bank account, a house equipped with ramps, wide doors, and a big garden bathed in sunlight. The battle had begun, and I was going to make sure Julian Vance lost everything. The legal ambush. By 8:00 a.m. the following morning, I was sitting in a high-rise office building in downtown Chicago, looking across a sleek glass desk at Sarah Lynn, one of the most ruthless, highly respected family law and corporate attorneys in the state. Sarah read through the financial documents and offshore transfer records I had handed her. As her eyes scanned the numbers, her eyebrows raised in disbelief. "This is extraordinary, Maya," Sarah said, tapping her pen against the desk. "Your husband hasn't just committed marital fraud by hiding marital assets prior to a divorce. He's committed massive tax fraud and corporate embezzlement. Moving funds from a publicly traded entity into private shell accounts in the Caymans is a federal offense." "I don't care about ruining his life for revenge, Sarah," I said firmly, my voice unwavering. "I care about securing my children's future. I need full physical and legal custody of Leo and Noah. I need an ironclad financial trust set up for their lifelong medical care, therapy, and living expenses, one that Julian can never touch, modify, or contest." Sarah smiled a sharp, professional smile. "With what you've handed me on this flash drive, Maya, Julian doesn't have a leg to stand on. If he fights you on custody or tries to hide money in court, we present these files to the IRS and the Securities and Exchange Commission. He will face federal indictment and spend the next 15 years in a federal prison." "Then let's give him a choice," I replied softly. "He can sign over full custody and set up the trust quietly, or he can watch his entire empire crumble on national news." while Sarah drafted the emergency legal filings, emergency custody petitions, and financial freezing orders, Julian was frantically trying to regain control of the situation. Since he couldn't reach me on my phone, he began blowing up the phones of my friends, my distant relatives, and even the boys' pediatricians. When that failed, he sent his personal attorney, Arthur Pendleton, to try and intimidate me. At 2:00 p.m., Pendleton called Sarah's office, requesting an immediate emergency conference call. Sarah put him on speakerphone while I sat quietly in the room. "Sarah," Pendleton began, his voice oozing with condescending authority. "Let's be reasonable here. My client, Mr. Vance, is a very powerful man. Maya took the children in the middle of the night without permission. That constitutes parental abduction. If she doesn't return the boys to the marital residence within 2 hours, we will file formal criminal charges and launch a public media campaign detailing her emotional instability." Sarah didn't even blink. She leaned into the microphone, her voice as smooth as ice. "Arthur, it's cute that you think you're in a position to make demands," Sarah said. "First of all, Maya has temporary emergency custody filings already stamped by the county judge as of 10:00 a.m. today, supported by affidavits regarding Mr. Vance's public abandonment and verbal abuse of his special needs children at a public charity event." There was a sudden, heavy silence on the other end of the line. "Secondly," Sarah continued, flipping open a folder, "before you throw around words like criminal charges, I strongly suggest you ask your client about the 4 shell companies registered under the names Vance Horizon LLC and Apex Capital Cayman. I have 3,000 pages of bank transfers showing $32 million diverted from company accounts over the last 18 months. If Mr. Vance wants to talk about police involvement, I can call the federal prosecutor right now." I could hear Pendleton breathing heavily on the line. The arrogant tone vanished completely. What does your client want?" Pendleton asked, his voice noticeably shaking. "Maya wants a total, unconditional surrender," Sarah declared. "Full legal and physical custody of Leo and Noah. 0 visitation rights unless supervised by a court-appointed child specialist. An irrevocable $50 million trust fund established immediately for the boys' medical and life care, funded directly from Julian's liquid assets. And the transfer of the family estate and all personal real estate into Maya's name." "That's half his net worth," Pendleton shouted. "Julian will never agree to those terms. It will ruin him financially." "Then tell your client to pack his bags for federal prison," Sarah said coldly. "You have 24 hours to sign the agreement, Arthur. If the signed papers aren't on my desk by 5:00 p.m. tomorrow, the SEC gets the flash drive, and the media gets the video recording of Julian calling his disabled kids an embarrassment at the Ritz-Carlton." Sarah slammed the phone down. I looked at her, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Do you think he'll sign?" Sarah looked back at me with absolute confidence. "Men like Julian Vance love their freedom, their reputation, and their status far more than their pride. He will sign." The public reckoning. Julian didn't sign right away. Arrogant men rarely surrender without one final, desperate struggle. Instead of accepting the deal, Julian thought he could use his money and public relations team to control the narrative. The following morning, a popular high society news blog published an exclusive insider article claiming that Julian Vance was battling a deeply personal family crisis. The article subtly implied that I was suffering from severe postpartum depression and mental instability, claiming I had hidden our children away from a loving, heartbroken father who was desperately trying to get them medical treatment. It was a disgusting, cheap smear campaign. He wanted to destroy my credibility before I could use the financial evidence against him. When I saw the article on my tablet that morning, sitting in the bright kitchen of our new rental home while the boys played peacefully with their sensory blocks on the soft carpet nearby, I didn't get angry. I smiled. Julian had made a fatal mistake. He had turned our private pain into a public war, and in doing so, he had given me full permission to finish him publicly. "He wants a public story," I told Sarah over the phone. Let's give him a master class in public relations. We didn't launch a mudslinging campaign. We didn't leak private family secrets or mudsling on gossip blogs. Instead, we reached out to a nationally syndicated investigative journalism outlet that had been doing a piece on corporate corruption and nonprofit fraud in tech enterprises. I agreed to do an exclusive, on-camera interview. 2 days later, the video was released. I sat in a clean, modest studio, wearing a simple navy blazer. I spoke calmly, clearly, and without a single tear. I didn't yell or show hatred. I simply told the absolute truth. I talked about building the company from scratch in our tiny apartment. I spoke about the terrifying night Leo and Noah were born, their daily battles with cerebral palsy, and the immense joy they brought to my life every single day. And then, the interviewer asked the crucial question, "Why did you leave?" I looked directly into the camera lens. I left because my husband looked at a room full of powerful investors and said that disabled children are an embarrassment. He said they make guests uncomfortable. I realized that day that my sons were growing up in a home where their own father viewed their existence as a flaw in his brand. I paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. A real man protects his family. A real father cherishes his children regardless of their physical abilities. My children are not an embarrassment. They are fighters, they are human beings, and they deserve to be loved without conditions. I walked out because I refused to let my boys spend another day feeling like they are a disappointment to the man who gave them life. The video went viral within 3 hours. It racked up over 10 million views in less than 24 hours. The internet erupted in absolute fury. Thousands of parents of special needs, children, disability rights advocacy groups, and everyday people flooded Julian's corporate social media pages with messages of outrage. Hashtags like Boycott Vance Tech and Justice for Leo and Noah began trending nationwide. The backlash was swift and catastrophic for Julian's company. Major institutional investors began pulling their capital out of Vance Tech. The board of directors held an emergency midnight meeting as the stock price plunged by 35% in a single trading session. Key corporate partners canceled their contracts, publicly condemning Julian's statements and cutting all ties with his firm. Julian's precious image, the very thing he had sacrificed his family to protect, was lying in absolute ruins. The fall of the king. On Friday afternoon, exactly 30 minutes before our ultimatum deadline expired, Sarah's office phone rang. It was Arthur Pendleton. His voice was completely broken, stripped of all arrogance and corporate bluster. "We will sign," Pendleton whispered nervously. "Julian will sign every single document. The custody agreement, the $50 million irrevocable trust fund, the property transfers, all of it. Just please stop the media story and do not send those financial files to the federal authorities." An hour later, Julian arrived at Sarah's office in person to sign the final paperwork. When he walked into the conference room, I barely recognized him. The smooth, confident, polished tech titan was gone. His eyes were bloodshot, his designer suit was wrinkled, and his posture was slouched. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 4 days. He didn't look at Sarah. He looked directly at me, his jaw trembling slightly. "You destroyed me, Maya," Julian said. His voice raspy and bitter as he took his seat across the long mahogany table. "You destroyed everything I spent 15 years building. Over a few words at a party? Do you have any idea what you've done to my company, to my reputation?" I sat straight, looking him dead in the eyes with absolute calm. "You destroyed yourself, Julian," I replied, my voice steady and quiet. "I didn't force you to hide money in offshore accounts. I didn't force you to lie to your board. And I certainly didn't force you to call your own children an embarrassment in front of a room full of strangers. You sacrificed your family for your pride, and now your pride has cost you everything." Julian bit his lip, his hands shaking slightly as Sarah placed the thick stack of legal documents in front of him. "They're just kids, Maya," he muttered, trying to defend himself one last time. "They don't even understand what I said at that party. They don't know what's going on." "They know when they are loved, Julian," I said coldly. And they know when someone looks at them with disgust. You lost the right to call yourself their father the moment you decided their worth was measured by their ability to walk or speak. Without another word, Julian picked up the pen. With a trembling hand, he signed his name on every single line. He signed away full physical and legal custody of Leo and Noah. He signed over the $50 million trust fund to ensure their care for the rest of their lives. He signed over our marital estate, our properties, and half of his remaining liquid assets. When he finished, he threw the pen down on the table, slumped back in his chair, and covered his face with his hands. He was financially crippled, disgraced in his industry, and completely alone. 2 days after the papers were signed, the board of directors at Vance Tech held a vote of no confidence. Julian was officially removed as CEO of the company he had founded. His name was stripped from the corporate building, his stock options were frozen amid pending internal audits, and he became a pariah in high society. The very people he had tried so hard to impress turned their backs on him entirely. A new dawn. 6 months later, the sun was shining brightly over a beautiful, sprawling 5-acre property in the countryside, just outside the city. I had taken the funds from our settlement and built a state-of-the-art residential learning and therapy facility for children with severe physical disabilities and special needs, a place where families could receive world-class care, physical therapy, and emotional support regardless of their financial background. We named it the Sunshine Horizon Center. In the center's spacious, sunny garden, wheelchair ramps wound through vibrant flower beds and custom-built sensory play areas. I sat on a wooden bench under a large oak tree, watching Leo and Noah. They were sitting in their specialized, brightly colored wheelchairs near a raised garden bed, laughing hysterically as a soft, gentle golden retriever therapist dog licked their hands. Noah let out a loud, joyous squeal, clapping his hands together with pure delight. Leo reached out his little arm, carefully patting the dog's soft fur, a massive, triumphant smile spreading across his face. I felt a warm, deep surge of peace fill my entire chest. There was no fear here, no cold judgment, no fake society rules or corporate expectations. Here, my sons were loved, celebrated, and cherished exactly as they were imperfect, resilient, and utterly beautiful. Julian had tried to reduce my boys to a tragedy, a flaw in his perfect life. But in trying to bury us, he didn't realize that we were seeds. We grew stronger, taller, and brighter through the storm. I looked up at the clear blue sky, feeling the warm afternoon breeze against my skin. I had lost a husband, a luxury mansion, and a life of high society glamour. But in return, I had gained my freedom, my dignity, and the power to protect the two most precious gifts I had ever been given. Betrayal is painful, and toxic love can make you feel small, helpless, and weak. But when you stand up for those who cannot fight for themselves, when you choose truth over fear and love over pride, there is no force on earth that can tear you down. Moral and lesson. Every person, regardless of their physical abilities, health, or status, carries immense value and deserves unconditional love and respect. True strength is not measured by wealth, power, or social standing, but by how fiercely we protect, cherish, and lift up those who need us most. Never let anyone make you feel ashamed of your challenges, and never stay in a place where your love is treated as a burden. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this story on Calm Girl Stories. If this story touched your heart or inspired you today, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to the Calm Girl Stories channel. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss another deeply emotional and empowering tale. This story is inspired by real experiences. We believe that every story carries a lesson that can bring light to others. To protect everyone's privacy, our editors may change names, locations, and certain details while keeping the heart of the story true.